Imagine a time long before the roar of the Colosseum, before the legions marched across continents, before the very name Rome echoed through history. Picture the Italian peninsula, a land slumbering under a Mediterranean sun, cloaked in what we might call the mists of before. This wasn't a land of grand cities and marble temples. Not yet. It was a rustic tapestry of rolling hills, draped in the soft greens of olive groves and the deep purples of burgeoning vineyards. The air was thick with the scent of wild herbs and damp earth, a perfume of pure, untamed nature. Life here moved at the pace of the seasons, dictated by the planting and the harvest. Through this serene landscape, a silent, powerful artery pulsed with life. The Tiber River, its waters, sometimes calm and reflective, sometimes murky and swift, flowed steadily toward the sea. It wasn't yet a witness to imperial triumphs, but a source of life for the creatures that drank from its banks and the scattered settlements nestled along its curves. The river whispered tales not of emperors, but of the spirits of the woods and the gods of the soil. And who were the people of this land? They weren't a unified nation. They were a collection of tribes, scattered like seeds upon the wind. The Latins, the Sabines, the Etruscans. To the north, each with their own customs, their own gods, their own small villages perched atop defensible hills. These were communities of shepherds and farmers, their hands calloused from working the land, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Their world was small, bounded by the nearest forest and the next valley. They lived in simple huts of wattle and daub, clustered together for safety and companionship. Their concerns were immediate: protecting their flocks from wolves, praying for rain to nourish their crops, and honoring the ancestors who lay buried in the earth beneath their feet. They feared the wrath of capricious gods and found comfort in the predictable cycle of day and night. Imagine a shepherd standing on a hilltop at dawn, watching the mist slowly burn off the valleys below. He sees not a future empire, but the promise of a good day for grazing. He hears not the clash of swords, but the distant bleating of his sheep and the song of an early bird. The world is quiet, peaceful, almost sleepy. The very hills that would one day bear the weight of Roman civilization were then just hills. The Palatine, the Capilan, the Aventine. They were simply high ground, offering a good vantage point or a place to build a humble shrine to a local deity. No one looked at these 7 hills and saw destiny. No one imagined they would become the heart of a world-spanning power. The culture was one of oral tradition. Stories were passed down around the hearth fire on long winter nights. Tales of heroes, monsters, and the creation of their world. These were the foundational myths, the very bedrock of their identity, whispered from one generation to the next. The written word was a rarity, a mysterious art practiced by their more sophisticated neighbors, the Etruscans, and the Greeks who had settled in the south. Life was a fabric woven with threads of superstition and reverence for nature. Every spring, every stream, every ancient tree was thought to house a spirit, a minor god who had to be appeased with small offerings. The world was alive, enchanted, and at times deeply frightening. But even in this tranquil, almost forgotten corner of the world, change was stirring. Along the trade routes, faint as they were, new ideas and new people began to trickle in. The Greeks in the south brought philosophy and art, while the Etruscans in the north showcased sophisticated engineering and a complex religious system. These influences were like seeds carried on the wind, landing in the fertile soil of the Latin heartland, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. It was into this sleepy, pastoral world a world of shepherds, of small tribes, of river guts and misty hillstadt. A new story was about to be born. In this serene landscape, where history itself seemed to be holding its breath, the seeds of an unparalleled legend were being sown. A legend of twin brothers, a she-wolf, and a city founded on a hill overlooking the Tiber. The mists of before were about to part, revealing the dawn of a new age, the age of Rome. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed peeling back the layers of history to see what came before, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories from the ancient world. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. where the legend truly begins. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through history. Last time, we explored the legendary founding of Rome with Romulus and Remus. But before the empire, before the republic, before even the city itself, there was a land. A mysterious, fertile land known as Latium. Let's travel back, even further in time, to the dawn of this legendary region. Imagine Central Italy long before the roar of the Colosseum or the hustle of the Forum. This is Latium, a land of rolling hills, lush valleys, and meandering rivers. Most notably the Tiber. It's a landscape painted with shades of green and brown, bathed in the warm Mediterranean sun. This wasn't a land of grand cities or powerful kings just yet. Instead, it was a quiet, almost forgotten corner of the world, inhabited by simple, hard-working people. Who were these early Latins? They were not warriors or conquerors in these early days. They were shepherds and farmers. Picture small communities, families bound together by kinship and the shared work of the land. Their lives revolved around the seasons. They guided their flocks of sheep and goats across the grassy hillsides, their days measured by the rising and setting of the sun. Their wealth wasn't in gold or silver, but in livestock and the bounty of their harvest. In the fertile plains near the Tiber River, they cultivated the earth. They grew simple but essential crops like spelt, a hardy type of wheat, along with barley, beans, and grapes. Their tools were basic, crafted from wood, stone, and eventually bronze. Life was a constant negotiation with nature. They prayed to rusted gods, spirits of the fields, the forests, and the streams, seeking their favor for a good harvest or the health of their flock. It was a life of profound connection to the earth beneath their feet. These early settlements weren't cities in the way we think of them. They were small, scattered villages, often built on hilltops. Why the hills? For a very practical reason. Defense. From these elevated positions, they could see potential threats from a distance, whether from rival tribes or raiding parties. The steep slopes provided a natural barrier, making their homes easier to protect. It also offered relief from the marshy, mosquito-ridden lowlands, which were often prone to flooding. Life in these hilltop villages was communal. Huts were simple, typically circular or rectangular structures made from wattle, an adobe framework of woven branches plastered with clay and mud, topped with a thatched roof. Inside, a central hearth provided warmth, light, and a place to cook. It was a rustic, humble existence, but one filled with a strong sense of community. Everyone knew everyone, and survival depended on cooperation. Now, let's zoom in on a particular cluster of hills, not far from a convenient crossing point on the Tiber River. These weren't the highest or most dramatic hills in Latin, but they were strategically placed. There was the Palatine, the Capitoline, the Aventine, the Celian, the Esquiline, the Viminal, and the Quirinal. Sound familiar? Yes, these are the famous 7 hills of Rome. But at this point in our story, they are just that. Hills. They are home to a few of these small, independent pastoral villages. The people living on the Palatine might look across the small valley and see the smoke rising from the hearths of the village on the Esquiline. They were neighbors, perhaps sometimes rivals, but they shared a common language, similar customs, and the same gods. Little did they know that they were living on ground that would become the epicenter of the world. The paths their sheep trod would one day become paved Roman roads. The small clearings where they gathered would one day hold magnificent temples and basilicas. These humble shepherds and farmers, living their quiet lives, were the progenitors of a civilization that would shape Western culture for millennia. The transition from scattered villages to a unified city wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow organic process that likely happened over centuries. Perhaps the villages began to trade more with each other. Maybe they formed a league for mutual defense against common enemies. The marshy valley between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, which would later become the Roman Forum, was probably drained and turned into a common marketplace and meeting point. This act of coming together, of turning a collection of separate hilltop settlements into a single, cohesive community, was the true birth of Rome. It wasn't just a physical construction of walls and buildings. It was a social and political fusion. The descendants of those early shepherds laid down their staffs and picked up the tools and weapons that would build an empire. So, when we think of the grandeur of Rome, let's not forget its humble origins. Let's remember Lehim, the green and fertile cradle of its civilization. Let's remember the shepherds on the hills, the farmers in the valleys, whose simple lives and small settlements laid the literal and cultural groundwork for everything that was to come. Their story is the deep, earthy root from which the mighty Roman tree would grow. They are the forgotten first chapter in the epic tale of Rome. Join us next time as we explore how these small villages coalesced and the first kings began to shape the destiny of this fledgling city on the 7 hills. The journey from a collection of huts to a kingdom is about to begin. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Rome's earliest days, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're journeying deep into the past, into a time when the world was a very different place. A time when every rustle of the leaves, every crash of thunder, and every ray of sunshine was seen not as a natural event, but as a message. This is Chapter 3, The Age of Kings and Gods. Imagine waking up not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the sun god himself painting the sky. When you look at a roaring river, you don't just see water, you see a powerful deity, a force that can give life with its floods or take it away. This was the reality for ancient people. The world was alive, brimming with divine presence. A flash of lightning wasn't just static discharge, it was the fury of a sky god. The birth of a healthy child wasn't just biology, it was a blessing from a fertility goddess. In T's world, everything had meaning, everything was personal. The universe wasn't a cold, empty space governed by impartial laws. It was a grand stage, and humanity was just one actor in a play written and directed by the gods. When a drought withered the crops, people didn't blame weather patterns. They asked, which god have we angered? What have we done wrong? They would then perform rituals, offer sacrifices, and build magnificent temples, all in an effort to appease these unseen forces that held their lives in their hands. Think about the great civilizations of antiquity: the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Greeks, the Romans. At the heart of each of these societies was a complex and vibrant pantheon of gods and goddesses. In Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile, which was the lifeblood of their civilization, was seen as the work of the god Hapi. The pharaoh wasn't just a political leader. He was a living god, a divine intermediary between the heavens and the earth. His duty was to maintain Mat, the cosmic order of truth, balance, and justice. If he failed, chaos would ensue, not just for his kingdom, but for the entire universe. Oberin, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. People lived in constant awareness of the god's power. Their city-states were believed to be the personal property of a patron deity. The famous ziggurats, those massive stepped pyramids, weren't just impressive architectural feats. They were man-made mountains, designed to bridge the gap between the mortal world and the divine realm, a staircase for the gods to descend to earth. They believed humans were created from clay for one purpose: to serve the gods, to feed them, clothe them, and build them homes. Life was a form of divine servitude. This worldview wasn't born from ignorance. It was a sophisticated and powerful way of making sense of a chaotic and often terrifying world. Without modern science to explain why earthquakes happened or why plagues spread, attributing these events to the will of the gods provided a sense of order and control. If a disaster was a punishment, it meant you could do something to fix it. You could pray, you could sacrifice, you could change your behavior. It gave people agency in a world that often felt overwhelming. This belief system shaped every aspect of life. Art wasn't just for decoration. It was a way to depict the gods and tell their stories. Laws weren't just social contracts, they were divine commandments. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes, was famously depicted as being handed directly to King Hammurabi from the sun god Shamash, the god of justice. This gave the law an absolute unquestionable authority. To break the king's law was to defy the gods themselves, and it wasn't just the present that the gods controlled. They also held the future. The ancients were obsessed with divination, the art of foretelling the future. They looked for signs everywhere. In the flight patterns of birds, in the shape of a sheep's liver, in the configuration of the stars. They believed that the gods had a grand plan, a destiny, not just for individuals, but for entire nations. Before a king went to war, he would consult an oracle. Priests and priestesses, believed to be mouthpieces for the gods, would interpret cryptic signs and deliver prophecies that could decide the fate of thousands, the destiny of Rome, the rise of an empire, the fall of a city. All of this was believed to be pre-written in the divine tapestry of fate. The founding of a city wasn't just a practical decision about location and resources. It was the fulfillment of a divine promise. Nations believed they were a chosen people, with a special relationship to their gods and a sacred mission to accomplish on earth. This belief that destiny was divinely ordained was an incredibly powerful motivator. It could inspire a people to build wonders that would last for millennia, to create empires that would stretch across continents, and to endure unimaginable hardship in the belief that they were part of a cosmic plan. It gave their struggles meaning and their triumphs a sense of divine approval. When a king won a battle, it wasn't just a victory of strategy and strength. It was proof that the gods were on his side. This is why kings and priests held such immense power. The king was the enforcer of the divine will on earth, and the priests were the interpreters of that will. Together, they formed the backbone of society. To challenge the king was to challenge the gods. To ignore the priests was to risk divine wrath. Their authority was absolute because it came from a source beyond human questioning. So, as we look back at this age of kings and gods, we see a world woven together by threads of myth, ritual, and faith. It was a time when humanity looked up at the stars and saw not balls of gas, but the watchful eyes of the gods. They saw their own lives, their societies, and their futures as part of a grand, divine story. Understanding this mindset is key to understanding the ancient world, its incredible achievements, and its enduring legacy. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. I hope it gave you a new perspective on how our ancestors saw the world. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you do not miss our next chapter. See you next time. Upbeat, adventurous intro music fades slightly into the background. Hello, and welcome back to our journey through the legendary founding of Rome. In our last episode, we followed the epic voyage of Aeneas, the Trojan hero who carried the destiny of his people across the Mediterranean. Today, we delve into the next chapter of this incredible saga, the rise and tragic fall of Alba Longa, the mother city of Rome. After the Trojans settled in Latium and Aeneas secured his kingdom, his son, Ascanius, also known as Iulus, felt a new calling. The city of Lavinium, founded by his father, was flourishing, but Ascanius envisioned something greater. He gathered a large group of Latins and Trojans and ventured into the Alban Hills, a beautiful, volcanic ridge overlooking the plains. There, nestled along a long, narrow crest, he founded a new city. He named it Alba Longa, Longwy City, a name that perfectly captured its shape and the brilliant white of its buildings against the green hills. This was a hound 30 years after Lavinium's founding, marking the beginning of a new dynasty. Alba Longa quickly became the center of power in Latium. For nearly 4 centuries, a line of kings descended directly from Ascanius, and Aeneas ruled from this mountain stronghold. They were known as the Sylvan Kings, a name derived from Ascanius' successor, Sil, who was said to have been born in the woods. This dynasty was a living link back to the heroes of Troy and the gods themselves, a lineage steeped in destiny and prophecy. The city wasn't just a political capital. It was the heart of the Latin League, a confederation of about 30 towns and tribes who shared a common language, culture, and religious heritage, all centered around the worship of Jupiter on the sacred Alban Mount. For generations, the kings of Alba Longa ruled in relative peace, their authority undisputed. The line passed from father to son, from Silvius to Aeneas Silvius, then to Latinus, Silvius, and on through a dozen successive rulers. Each king upheld the traditions of their ancestors, overseeing the religious rites and ensuring the prosperity of the Latin people. The city thrived, its population grew, and its influence spread throughout the Italian peninsula. It was from this noble, unbroken line of kings that the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, were destined to emerge. But before their birth, a shadow would fall upon the royal house of Alba Longa, a shadow of ambition and betrayal that would set the stage for the city's eventual doom. The trouble began with the 12th king, Proca. He had 2 sons, Numita, the elder, and Amulius, the younger. By tradition and right of birth, the throne belonged to Numita. He was a just and gentle man, respected by the people. Amulius, however, was consumed by envy and a thirst for power. He was ruthless, ambitious, and cunning. When King Proca died, he left his kingdom to Numita, but he also bequeathed his personal treasure to Amulius. Amulius used this wealth to build a base of support, bribing nobles and cultivating a following of loyal soldiers. He saw his brother's gentle nature, not as a virtue, but as a weakness to be exploited. The moment came when Amulius decided to act. He staged a coup, driving his older brother Numita from the throne. With his armed supporters, he seized control of Alba Longa and declared himself king. The people were shocked, but Amulius ruled with an iron fist, and few dared to oppose him. To secure his illegitimate reign, Amulius knew he had to eliminate any potential threat from Numita's line. He had Numita's sons murdered, extinguishing the direct male heirs to the throne. But what was he to do about Numita's daughter, Rhea Silvia? Amulius devised what he thought was a clever plan. He couldn't simply kill her without angering the gods and the people, as she was a princess of a sacred lineage. Instead, he forced Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal virgin. The Vestals were priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, and were sworn to a vow of celibacy for 30 years. By making her a priestess, Amulius believed he had cleverly ensured that she would never have children who could one day challenge his rule. It seemed like the perfect political maneuver. The line of Numita was, for all intents and purposes, finished. But they, gods as they so often do in these tales, had other plans. One day, as Rhea Silvia went to a sacred grove to draw water for a temple ritual, she was overcome by a deep sleep. The legend, as told by the Roman historian Livy, says that Mars, the powerful god of war, was so captivated by her beauty that he descended to the grove. It was there, under the watchful eyes of the gods, that the divine seed was planted. When Rhea Silvia later gave birth to twin boys, she named Mars as their father, a claim that was both a plea for protection and a statement of their extraordinary destiny. De Boisuere, of course, Romulus and Remus. When King Amulius learned the twins' birth, he was thrown into a rage. His carefully laid plans were in ruins. Not only had his niece broken her sacred vow, but she had borne sons who, with their divine parentage, posed an even greater threat to his throne than he could have ever imagined. He couldn't allow them to live. Amulius ordered Rhea Silvia to be imprisoned, and he commanded a servant to take the infant twins to the Tiber River and drown them. The river was swollen from recent rains, overflowing its banks. The servant, perhaps feeling a pang of pity or simply unable to reach the main current, placed the basket containing the twins in the shallow, calmer waters at the edge of the flood. He believed the river would eventually rise and carry them to their doom. But fate, guided by the gods, intervened. The waters receded, leaving the basket safely on dry land at the foot of the Palatine Hill, nestled under a wild fig tree known as the ruminal fig tree. The cries of the hungry infants attracted a she-wolf, a creature sacred to Mars. Instead of harming them, the she-wolf gently nursed the twins, sustaining them with her own milk. A woodpecker, another animal sacred to Mars, also brought them bits of food. This miraculous scene was witnessed by a royal shepherd named Faustulus. He took the infants home to his wife, Laurentia, and they raised the boys as their own sons. Romulus and Remus grew up as shepherds, strong, brave, and natural leaders, completely unaware of their royal and divine heritage. As the years passed, the twins became famous in the region for their courage. They defended their flocks from wild animals and fought off robbers who preyed on other shepherds. One day, a dispute broke out between the shepherds of King Romulus and those of the deposed Numitor, who was living a quiet life in exile. During the ensuing fight, Remus was captured and dragged before King Romulus, accused of raiding Numitor's lands. However, when Romulus saw the young man, he sent him to Numitor for punishment. When Numitor saw Remus, he was struck by the young man's noble bearing and fearless demeanor. He began to question him about his origins. At the same time, Faustulus, fearing for Remus's life, decided it was time to reveal the truth to Romulus. He told him the story of the basket, the river, and their miraculous survival. Faustulus then rushed to the city to tell Numitor that his grandsons were alive. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Numitor recognized Remus as his grandson, and Romulus, now aware of his true identity, gathered a band of shepherds and marched on Alba Longa. He stormed the palace, killed the tyrannical Romulus, and restored his grandfather, Numitor, to his rightful throne. With Numitor reinstated as king of Alba Longa, the twins were hailed as heroes. But they were filled with a new ambition, not to rule in Alba Longa, but to found a city of their own on the very hills where they had been saved. This decision would lead them to the Palatine Hill and set in motion the founding of Rome. But it also spelled the beginning of the end for Alba Longa. For a time, the two cities coexisted. Rome grew rapidly under Romulus, attracting outcasts, exiles, and adventurers, and its power began to eclipse that of its mother city. The relationship soured. The third king of Rome, Tullus Hostilius, was an aggressive and warlike ruler. Much like Romulus himself, a series of cattle raids and disputes escalated tensions between Rome and Alba Longa. War became inevitable. However, both sides were reluctant to engage in a full-scale battle that would shed the blood of kinsmen. To settle the conflict, they agreed to a unique and legendary duel. Each city would choose a set of triplet brothers to fight as champions. The city whose champions won would rule over the other. Rome chose the Horatii brothers. Alba Longa chose the Curiti brothers. The two armies gathered to watch as the fate of their cities was decided by these 6 men. The fight was brutal. In the first clash, 2 of the Roman Horatii were killed, leaving the lone Horatius to face all 3 of the Curiti, who were wounded but still standing. The Alban army erupted in cheers, believing victory was theirs. The Romans watched in despair. But the remaining Horatius was not only brave, but clever. He pretended to flee. The 3 wounded Curiti pursued him, but because of their different injuries, they became separated as they ran. This was exactly what Horatius had planned. He turned and faced them one by one, dispatching each of the exhausted and separated Curiti brothers. Rome was victorious. True to the agreement, Alba Longa submitted to Roman rule, but their leader, Methius Fulfetus, was resentful. He later betrayed Rome in a battle against the neighboring cities of Fidna and Veii, holding his Alban troops back at a critical moment. When Tullus Hostilius won the battle anyway, his vengeance was swift and terrible. He condemned Methius for his treachery and, as a warning to all, had him tied between 2 chariots and torn apart. Then, Tullus Hostilius made a momentous decision. He declared that the city of Alba Longa was to be completely destroyed. Roman soldiers marched on the ancient city, the home of their founders, the heart of the Latin people for 400 years. They systematically demolished every building, every home, every temple sparing only the temples of the gods. The entire population of Alba Longa was forcibly relocated to Rome, where they were integrated into the Roman citizenry, doubling the city's population and strengthening its future. And so, the great city of Alba Longa, the long white city on the ridge, vanished from history, its legacy absorbed into its ambitious and powerful child, Rome. The fall of Alba Longa was not just the end of a city, it was a pivotal moment, symbolizing the transfer of power and destiny from the old Latin dynasty to the new, unstoppable force that was Rome. Thank you for joining us for this dramatic chapter in Rome's origin story. The tale of Alba Longa is a powerful reminder of how ambition, betrayal, and fate can shape the course of history. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the ancient world. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode, where we will witness the legendary founding of Rome itself. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Hello, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of history and myth. Today, we delve into a story that sits at the very heart of one of the world's greatest civilizations. It's a tale of divine intervention, forbidden love, and a prophecy that would shape the destiny of millions. This is Chapter 5, The Prophecy of the Twins. Our story begins in the ancient city of Albalanga with a young woman named Rhea Silvia. She was no ordinary woman. She was a princess, the daughter of King Numa. However, her life was not one of royal luxury. Her uncle, Amulius, had usurped the throne, ruthlessly seizing power from her father. To ensure that Numitor's line would produce no heirs to challenge his rule, Amulius forced Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal virgin. The Vestals were priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, home, and family. They took a sacred vow of celibacy for 30 years, dedicating their lives to maintaining the eternal flame in Vesta's temple. The punishment for breaking this vow was severe, a terrifying fate of being buried alive. By forcing Rhea Silvia into this role, Amulius believed he had secured his throne, eliminating any future threat from his brother's lineage. But destiny, as we know, has a way of defying the plans of men. One fateful night, as Rhea Silvia slept within the hallowed halls of the temple, her dreams were consumed by a powerful and unsettling vision. She dreamt of fire, not the gentle, sacred flame she tended to Dela, but a wild, untamable inferno. It was a blaze that didn't just consume, it created. It was a signa divine omen that her life was about to be irrevocably changed. Little did she know, this fiery dream was a prelude to a visitor from the heavens. As she awoke from her vision, she found herself in the presence of a magnificent and imposing figure, clad in gleaming armor, with a crested helmet and a gaze that burned with intensity. It was none other than Mars, the Roman god of war. Some accounts say he came to her in a dream, others that he appeared in person, his divine presence filling the sacred space. Whether it was a dream or reality, the encounter was profound. The god of war, a symbol of raw power and conflict, had come to the gentle Vestal virgin. From this divine union, the impossible happened. Rhea Silvia, sworn to celibacy, conceived. As the months passed, her secret became impossible to hide. Fear must have been her constant companion. She knew the terrible price for breaking her vows. Yet, alongside that fear, there must have been a sense of wonder, a feeling that she was part of something far greater than herself. She was carrying the children of a god. When the time came, she gave birth not to one child, but to twin boys. They were beautiful, strong, and possessed an aura of greatness. Even as infants, news of their birth sent shockwaves through the kingdom and reached the ears of the tyrannical king Amulius. His worst fears had been realized. The lineage he had tried so desperately to extinguish had survived, and not just survived, but been blessed by a god. Whispers of an ancient prophecy began to resurface throughout the land. It was a prophecy that had long been forgotten, dismissed as mere legend. But now, with the birth of the twin sons of Mars, it seemed chillingly relevant. The prophecy foretold that children born of divine blood and a royal line would overcome great adversity. They would not only reclaim their rightful heritage, but would go on to found a city that would grow into a vast and powerful empire, an empire destined to rule the world. These twin boys, born in secret and under the threat of death, were Romulus and Remus, and the prophecy spoke of their destiny, the founding of Rome. King Amulius was consumed by rage and paranoia. These infants represented the single greatest threat to his reign. He couldn't allow them to live. He couldn't risk the prophecy coming true. He ordered his soldiers to seize the babies from their mother. Imagine the heartbreak of Rhea Silvia, having her divine children torn from her arms. Amulius, wanting to avoid the wrath of the gods for directly shedding the blood of Mars's children, commanded his servants to abandon the twins, to leave them to the mercy of the elements. The servants took the infants, placed them in a humble basket, and carried them to the banks of the mighty Tiber River. The river was swollen from recent rains, its currents swift and treacherous. They placed the basket into the churning water, pushing it out into the stream. As the tiny vessel drifted away, carrying the future founders of Rome, it seemed their fate was sealed. How could two helpless infants possibly survive? But the gods and destiny were not finished with them yet. The river, as if guided by an unseen hand, carried the basket gently downstream. It didn't capsize. It didn't sink. Instead, it came to rest in a tranquil spot, caught in the roots of a wild fig tree near the base of what would one day be known as the Palatine Hill. The twins were safe, for now, but they were alone and hungry. It is here that the myth takes an even more extraordinary turn. As the babies cried, their wails were heard not by a human, but by a she-wolf, a lupa. Wolves were sacred animals to Mars, and this was no ordinary wolf. She had just lost her own cubs and was drawn to the sound. Instead of harming the infants, a maternal instinct took over. She approached the basket and began to nurse the twin boys, sustaining them with her own milk. This incredible image of she-wolf suckling two human babies has become one of the most iconic symbols of Rome, representing the city's wild, untamed origins and its divine protection. Shortly after, a woodpecker, another animal sacred to Mars, also arrived. It brought the boys small morsels of food, further aiding in their miraculous survival. For days, the she-wolf and the woodpecker cared for the divine twins, shielding them from the dangers of the wilderness. They were being nurtured by nature itself, protected by the sacred animals of their father mares. Their improbable survival was finally discovered by a shepherd named Faustulus. While tending his flock near the river, he stumbled upon the incredible scene. The she-wolf, caring for the two human infants. Astonished, he realized these must be special children. He carefully took the twins and brought them back to his humble hut, where he and his wife, Larentia, decided to raise them as their own. And so, Romulus and Remus, the sons of a god and a princess, grew up not in a palace, but in the rustic simplicity of a shepherd's home. They were unaware of their royal bloodline or their divine parentage. They grew strong, brave, and natural leaders among the other shepherd boys. They were skilled hunters and fierce protectors of their flocks, displaying the martial prowess inherited from their father, Mars. They lived a simple life, but the prophecy lingered. The seeds of a future empire were being sown not in the courts of kings, but in the rugged hills of the Italian countryside. The boys, born from a dream of fire and a divine encounter, had survived the wrath of a tyrant and the perils of the wild. Their journey was just beginning. They were destined to fulfill the prophecy, to build the city that would change the course of history forever. And in our next chapter, we will see how these shepherd boys discover the truth of their identity and set out to claim their incredible destiny. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey into myth and history. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more tales from our ancient past. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in the epic founding of Rome. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the legendary founding of Rome. Today, we delve into a chapter filled with treachery and a desperate act of cruelty. This is the story of King Amulius. Let's set the scene. In the ancient kingdom of Alba Longa, a power struggle was brewing. The rightful King Numitor was a good and just ruler, but his reign was not to last. His own brother, Amulius, harbored a dark ambition. Consumed by jealousy and a thirst for power, Amulius plotted to overthrow Numitor. He didn't just want the crown, he wanted to erase any threat to his rule permanently. One fateful day, Amulius staged a coup. He seized the throne, deposing his brother and casting a shadow over the kingdom. But taking the crown wasn't enough. Amulius was haunted by a prophecy, a whisper of a future he could not control. The prophecy foretold that the descendants of his niece, Silvia, would one day rise to reclaim the throne and bring about his downfall. This fear gnawed at him, twisting his heart into a knot of paranoia. Amulius knew he had to cut off Numitor's line. He first dealt with Numitor's son, ensuring he would never challenge his authority. Then, he turned his cold gaze upon his niece Silvia. To prevent her from ever having children who could fulfill the prophecy, he forced her into a life of supposed purity, making her a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to chastity. He thought he had cleverly circumvented fate, but destiny, as we know, has a way of finding its path. Despite Amulius's careful planning, Rhea Silvia miraculously gave birth to twin boys. When news of the births reached the palace, Amulius was thrown into a fury. The prophecy he had tried so hard to prevent was now staring him in the face. Embodied in two innocent infants, his fear morphed into a chilling resolve. He saw the babies not as his great-nephews, but as the seeds of his own destruction. He knew he could not be seen as a kinslayer in the eyes of his people or the gods. A direct, public execution was too risky. So, he devised a plan that was both cruel and cowardly. He would leave the twins' fate to the will of the gods, a convenient excuse for a heinous act. He summoned two loyal servants and gave them a terrible order, one that would echo through history. "Take the infants," he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth or familiar love. "Carry them to the banks of the Tiber River. Place them in a basket and cast them into the current. Let the river decide their fate." The servants, bound by their duty to the king, had no choice but to obey, their hearts heavy with the grim task ahead. Imagine the scene. The mighty Tiber River, swollen and raging from recent rains. Its currents were powerful, treacherous, a churning force of nature. It was into this unforgiving water that Amulius intended to send the two infants. He believed the river would be their swift and certain tomb, washing away the prophecy and securing his throne forever. He watched as his servants took the small basket, carrying the future of Rome, and headed towards the riverbank. In his mind, the threat was about to be neutralized. He thought he had outsmarted destiny itself. But the river, a symbol of life and flow, had other plans. As the servants placed the basket on the water's edge, the river god Tiberinus seemed to take notice. The floodwaters, which had been raging, began to recede gently. Instead of being swept into the violent main current, the basket was carried softly along the river's edge. It drifted like a leaf, protected by an unseen hand, until it came to rest in the shallows at the foot of a hill, nestled among the roots of a wild fig tree. There, safe from the churning water and the cruel king's decree, the twins lay crying, their small voices a fragile sound in the vast wilderness. Amulius, in his palace, believed his problem was solved. He was oblivious to the fact that his act of cruelty had not ended a story, but had just set in motion the most incredible chapter of all. He thought he had drowned a prophecy, but he had only launched a legend. The boys were alive, and their extraordinary journey was just beginning. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter of Rome's founding myth. What Amulius meant for evil, fate turned into the start of something magnificent. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Hit that notification bell, and we'll see you in the next video as we discover who finds the abandoned twins. Thanks for watching. The river Tiber, a force of nature, was in a mood unlike any other. Swollen by recent rains, its waters churned, a murky brown, carrying with it the debris of the countryside, branches, leaves, and the sorrows of the land. Yet, on this day, the river's fury seemed tempered by a strange and divine gentleness. It was as if the river god Tiberinus himself had taken a personal interest in the fate of a tiny, fragile vessel bobbing upon his surface. This vessel was no grand ship, but a humble basket, a cradle woven from reeds, hastily waterproofed with pitch. Inside, nestled together, lay two infants, blissfully unaware of their perilous journey. They were twins, wrapped in simple cloths, their soft breaths rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of sleep. They did not cry, nor did they stir. It was as if a silent promise of protection enveloped them, shielding them from the cold and the current. The cradle had been cast into the water with a heavy heart, an act of desperation born from fear and prophecy. It was a sentence of death, a surrender to the untamed river. But fate, or perhaps a power far greater, had other plans. The current, which should have swiftly dragged the basket into the river's depths, or dashed it against the rocky banks, instead guided it with an uncanny intelligence. It was a miracle in motion. The cradle drifted, not aimlessly, but with a sense of purpose. It navigated past treacherous eddies and whirlpools that would have swallowed it whole. It dodged submerged logs and sharp rocks, the water seeming to part and create a safe passage. The river, usually a symbol of untamed power, became a nurturing guide. Its roar softened to a lullaby. Its powerful surge became a gentle rocking, coaxing the infants deeper into their peaceful slumber. The sky above, which had been gray and weeping, began to clear. Rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the small cradle, making it a beacon of hope on the vast expanse of water. As the river flowed, it carried the twins towards the heart of the future. It passed by hills and valleys, landscapes that would one day bear witness to the rise of an empire these two babes were destined to found. The world around them was wild and untamed, a land of shepherds and small, scattered settlements. But in their sleep, they carried the seed of greatness, a destiny that the very elements seemed conspired to protect. The journey continued, the river bending and turning. On its banks, shepherds watched their flocks, their eyes occasionally catching a glimpse of the strange object floating downstream, dismissing it as just another piece of river refuse. They couldn't know they were witnessing the opening chapter of a legend, a story that would be told for thousands of years. They couldn't see the divine aim at play, the invisible threads of destiny being woven in the water's flow. Finally, the river approached a cluster of 7 hills, their slopes green and fertile. At the foot of one of these hills, the Palatine, the river's course shallowed. Here, where the water lapped gently against the muddy shore, stood an ancient and sacred fig tree, the Ficus Romulus. Its roots, thick and gnarled, like the fingers of an old, wise guardian, reached down from the bank and spread into the water. It was here that the cradle's journey was meant to end. The current, still gentle, nudged the basket directly towards the tree. It was not a violent collision, but a soft embrace. The cradle floated into the web of roots, which caught it and held it fast, preventing it from being swept away again by the receding waters. The basket settled into its new resting place, rocking softly one last time before coming to a complete stop. The water level began to fall, the flood receding as quickly as it had come. The cradle was left safe and secure on the damp earth, cradled by the roots of the fig tree, sheltered beneath its leafy branches. The miracle was complete. The river had delivered its precious cargo. The silence that followed was profound. The world held its breath. The twins, having survived the river, were now at the mercy of the wilderness. But their story was far from over. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, a sound broke the stillness. It was the cry of a hungry infant, a small, powerful wail that echoed through the quiet landscape. It was a cry for life, a declaration of survival against all odds. This cry was a summons. It was the signal that the next chapter of this incredible story was about to begin. It was a call that would be answered not by a human, but by a creature of the wild, drawn by a maternal instinct as powerful and mysterious as the river's gentle current. The legend of Rome was about to be nourished at the foot of the Palatine Hill, all thanks to the miracle on the Tiber. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of the journey. The story of these twins is just beginning, and the next chapter is even more incredible. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. We'll see you in the next video. Imagine a night heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient secrets. The Tiber River, swollen and dark, has just receded, leaving behind a world hushed and waiting. In the shadows of the Palatine Hill, nestled among the roots of a wild fig tree, a wicker basket rests on the muddy bank. Inside, 2 infants, no more than a few days old, stir and begin to cry. Their wails are thin, fragile sounds, swallowed by the immense silence of the primeval forest. These are not just any abandoned children. They are the sons of a Vestal virgin and the god of war, Mars himself. Their names are Romulus and Remus, and their cries are the first notes in the symphony of Rome. The moonlight, a silver-white liquid, spills through the canopy, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air is still, so still you could hear a leaf fall, but the only sound is the desperate, hungry crying of the twins. They are alone, cast out by a fearful king who saw their divine heritage not as a blessing, but as a threat to his throne. Their fate seems sealed, another tragic whisper lost to the wilderness. But destiny, especially the destiny of future kings, is a stubborn and powerful force. From the deep woods, a creature emerges, She moves with a silent, fluid grace, her paws making no sound on the soft ground. Her eyes, 2 points of amber, catch the moonlight. This is Lupa, a she-wolf, her own pups, recently lost. Her maternal instincts are sharp, her ears pricked not by the sound of prey, but by a sound that resonates deep within her. The sound of helpless young. She is drawn by their distress, a primal call that overrides all else. She is a predator, a hunter, a symbol of the untamed wild. Yet tonight, she will become a mother. She approaches the basket cautiously, her powerful form silhouetted against the moonlit riverbank. A low growl rumbles in her chest, not of aggression, but of curiosity and perhaps a strange animal recognition. The infants, sensing the large presence, Kryla, their tiny fists, bold in fear and need. The she-wolf lowers her great head, her wet nose twitching as she takes in their scent. She sees not a threat, not a meal, but 2 small, defenseless lives on the brink of extinction. The mother in her recognizes the children in them. What happens next is the stuff of legend, a moment so profound it would be carved into the very soul of a future empire. The great she-wolf, the embodiment of wild, untamed nature, lies down beside the basket. Gently, she nudges the crying infants with her snout, her touch surprisingly delicate. She licks their tear-streaked faces, cleaning them with a rough, motherly tongue. The twins, feeling the warmth and the gentle contact, begin to quiet down. Their fear subsides, replaced by a desperate, instinctual hope. Then, she offers them what only a mother can. She shifts her body, exposing her underbelly, and allows the human babies to nurse. In the profound silence of the Italian forest, under the watchful gaze of the moon, an impossibly miraculous scene unfolds. The sons of a god drink the milk of a wolf. They draw life and strength not from a human hand, but from the raw, nurturing power of the wild. This act is a sacred pact, a fusion of civilization and nature, of divine will and animal instinct. The wolf's milk doesn't just save their lives. It infuses them with the spirit of the wilderness itself, its resilience, its ferocity, its unyielding strength. For days, this strange, sacred family continues. Lupa guards her adopted sons with fierce devotion. She hunts for herself, but always returns to the fig tree, to the 2 small humans who have become her own. A woodpecker, another creature sacred to Mars, joins this unlikely assembly, bringing the boys morsels of food, dropping berries and bits of honeycomb near their basket. The forest, once a place of certain death, has become their sanctuary. They are raised not in a palace, but in the cradle of nature, mothered by a wolf, attended by a bird, and watched over by the ancient gods. This is more than just a survival story. It's a foundation myth that explains the very character of Rome. The Romans would later see themselves in this image, a people who were fierce and practical like the wolf, yet divinely destined for greatness. They were civilized, yes, but at their core, they possessed a wild, untamable spirit that they inherited from their first mother. The she-wolf Lupa wasn't just a random animal. She was a symbol of Rome's own identity, a city that would nurture and protect its own with a fierce loyalty, yet be capable of ruthless, predatory expansion. The image of the she-wolf nursing the twins became the eternal symbol of Rome. It speaks of a city born from a paradox, an act of profound compassion from a creature of the wild. It tells us that greatness can emerge from the most desperate of circumstances, that destiny can be found in the mud of a riverbank, and that the heart of a city can beat with the wild, strong pulse of a wolf. Romulus and Remus, filled with the strength of their lupin mother, would grow to be strong, ambitious leaders. They carried the wilderness in their blood, a fire that would eventually lead one of them to lay the first stone of a small settlement on the Palatine Hill, a city that would one day rule the world. And it all began here, on a quiet night, with the cries of 2 babies and the arrival of the she-wolf of Rome. Thank you so much for journeying back in time with us to witness this incredible moment. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more tales from history and mythology. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. In the misty dawn, where the Tiber River whispered its ancient secrets, a lone figure walked the muddy banks. This was Faustulus, a shepherd in the service of King Emil, a man whose life was etched by the rhythm of the seasons and the bleating of his flock. His heart was as rugged and as kind as the landscape he called home. As he scanned the reeds for a lost lamb, his eyes caught something unusual, a small basket, bobbing gently in the water, caught against the roots of a wild fig tree. Curiosity piqued. Faustulus waded into the chilly water. A faint, muffled cry reached his ears, a sound so human and so vulnerable it tugged at his very soul. He reached the basket, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he pulled back the cloth covering. And there, nestled together, were two beautiful, healthy baby boys. Their cheeks were rosy, their fists clenched, and their eyes, when they opened, held the innocent wonder of the world. He saw no signs of who had left them, only the vast, silent wilderness and the river that had brought them to his feet. Just then, he heard a rustle in the undergrowth. A she-wolf, her coat the color of the earth, emerged from the shadows. Faustulus froze his hand, instinctively going to the crook he carried. But the wolf showed no aggression. Instead, her gaze was soft, almost maternal, as she looked at the infants. Faustulus understood then. This creature had not been a threat. She had been their protector, their unlikely wetness in this wild place. As she turned and vanished back into the forest, Faustulus knew he was witnessing something touched by the gods. Carefully, he lifted the basket from the water, his heart swelling with a strange mix of pity and awe. These were no ordinary he felt it in his bones. Leaving them to fate was not an option. He wrapped them securely and began the journey home, his mind racing. What would he tell his wife, Acalarentia? How could they, a simple shepherd and his wife, raise two children who had seemingly been delivered by the river and guarded by a wolf? He reached his humble cottage, a place filled with the warmth of a hearth and the scent of baking bread. Acalarencia was there, her face a map of kindness and hard work. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widening at the sight of the basket. Faustulus placed it gently on the table and explained the morning's incredible events: the basket, the river, the she-wolf. He expected questions, hesitation, perhaps even fear. Instead, Acalarencia's face, soft, she peered into the basket, and a look of profound love bloomed on her features. She had always yearned for children, and here were two, delivered to their doorstep as if in answer to a silent prayer. Without a word, she reached in and gathered one of the babies into her arms, cooing softly as he quieted against her shoulder. Faustulus took the other. In that moment, a family was born. They named the boys Romulus and Remus. The years passed like the turning of the seasons. The hills around their home became the boys' playground. Faustulus taught them everything he knew: how to read the stars, how to track animals, how to find the freshest springs in the most sheltered pastures. He taught them to be strong, to wield the staff not just for herding, but for defense. He taught them the value of hard work, waking them before dawn to tend the flocks, their small hands learning the familiar textures of wool and wood. Acalarencia nurtured their hearts. She taught them stories of gods and heroes, of justice and courage. She taught them compassion, showing them how to care for a sick lamb or help a struggling neighbor. Under her loving care, they grew from boys into young men, and what men they became. Romulus was the more serious and thoughtful, a natural leader with a commanding presence. Remus was quicker to laugh, his spirit wild and free, with a sharp wit and an even sharper eye. Though different, they were inseparable, two halves of a single, powerful whole. Their strength and bravery became legendary among the other shepherds. While other youths spent their time in idle games, Romulus and Remus were different. They defended the flocks from wolves and wild boars, with a fearlessness that astounded everyone. Moretantad. They became the champions of the common folk. When cunning robbers descended from the hills to steal livestock and terrorize the countryside, it was Romulus and Remus who rallied the other shepherds. They were not just strong, they were clever. They set traps, planned ambushes, and fought with a coordinated fury that sent the bandits fleeing. They would recover the stolen goods and, instead of keeping them. Distribute them fairly among the shepherds who had suffered losses. They asked for no reward, only the satisfaction of seeing justice done. Soon, the people of the countryside began to look to the twins for leadership. They were respected not for wealth or title, but for their character. They were fermented, never taking more than their share. They were ehus settling disputes with a wisdom that seemed far beyond their years. And they were brave, always the first to face danger for the good of their community. Faustulus and Larentia watched them with immense pride, their hearts full. But Faustulus held a secret. He still had the basket, the finely woven cradle that had carried the boys down the river. He knew, deep down, that these were not the sons of a simple shepherd. Their noble bearing, their innate leadership, their almost divine favorite, all pointed to a higher, more mysterious origin. He often wondered about their true parents, about the destiny that awaited them. For now, they were his sons, the pride of the hills, beloved by all who knew them. But he sensed that the quiet life of the countryside was just the beginning of their story. The world was much larger than these pastures, and destiny, like a river, has a course it must follow. The two young shepherds were growing, and soon the call to a much greater fate would echo through the hills. Thank you so much for watching this chapter of our story. If you've enjoyed following the journey of Romulus and Remus, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We love sharing these tales with you, and your support means the world. See you in the next video. Years passed, and the boys raised by a she-wolf, now nurtured by the shepherd Faustulus and his wife Larentia, grew into strong and charismatic young men. Romulus and Remus were natural leaders, their courage and strength setting them apart from the other shepherds. They roamed the hills of Lachum, not just tending flocks, but defending their community against bandits and wild beasts. Their reputation for bravery spread far and wide, drawing a loyal following of young men who admired their spirit and leadership. They were kings among shepherds, their domain the wild, untamed lands. One day, fate intervened in a way no one could have predicted. A dispute over grazing lands erupted between the shepherds of Numitor and the shepherds of his brother, the usurper King Amulius. During the ensuing skirmish, as was common, Remus was captured by Amulius's men. He was dragged before the king, accused of raiding his lands. It was a serious charge, one that could easily end with his execution. But Amulius, looking at the proud and defiant young man before him, felt an unsettling flicker of recognition. He saw a nobility in Remus that was far too regal for a simple shepherd. Meanwhile, Faustulus, the shepherd who had raised the twins, knew the time had come to reveal the secret he had guarded for nearly 2 decades. He had always suspected the boys' noble origins, from the moment he found them in the exquisitely crafted basket by the river. Seeing Remus in mortal danger, he rushed to Romulus and told him everything about the basket, the river, and their miraculous survival. He confessed his belief that they were the lost grandsons of Numitor. Simultaneously, in the palace of Alba, a similar revelation was unfolding. Numitor, who was present at Remus's hearing, was struck by the young man's age and noble bearing. He questioned Remus about his past, and as the pieces fell into place, the old king realized with astonishment that he was looking at his own grandson. The truth ignited a fire in Romulus. The story of his mother's imprisonment and his grandfather's overthrow filled him with a righteous fury. He was no mere shepherd. He was the heir to a throne, a prince denied his birthright. He rallied his band of loyal shepherds and followers, their hearts stirred by the injustice and inspired by Romulus's passion. His plan was bold and direct. They would march on Alba, overthrow the tyrant Amulius, and restore their grandfather Numitor to his rightful place. The rebellion was swift and decisive. Romulus and his men stormed the city, their surprise attack catching Amulius's forces completely off guard. The citizens of Alba, who had long suffered under Amulius's cruel rule, quickly joined the cause. They had grown weary of the tyrant and were inspired by the sight of the 2 powerful young men who seemed to embody a long-lost hope. Romulus fought his way to the palace, a force of nature driven by years of suppressed destiny. He confronted the usurper King Amulius, the man who had torn his family apart. In the ensuing confrontation, Amulius, the tyrant who had built his reign on fear and betrayal, was finally brought to justice. His rule, born from a brother's treachery, ended in a swift and final clash. With the usurper gone, a great cheer erupted from the people of Alba Longa. Romulus and Remus, the abandoned twins, had returned as liberators. They found their grandfather, Numitor, and with the full support of the people, they placed the crown back on his head, restoring the rightful king to the throne of Alba Longa. The city celebrated 4 days. Numitor, overjoyed at the return of his grandsons in his kingdom, offered them positions of power and honor in Alba Longa. But Romulus and Remus, having grown up in the wild, open lands, felt constrained by the ancient city's walls. Their spirits yearned for something more. They were not meant to be princes in another man's court, not even their grandfathers. They had their own destiny to forge, their own city to build. Their gaze turned back to the 7 hills near the Tiber River, the very place where their lives had been saved by the Shiva. It was there, they decided, that they would lay the foundations of a new city, a city that would one day rule the world. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter of their incredible story. Their brothers, united in their victory, now faced a new challenge, creating a legacy of their own. But this shared dream would soon test their bond in ways they could never imagine, leading to a legendary conflict that would give birth to the eternal city of Rome. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to Alba Longa. The story of Romulus and Remus is just beginning to unfold, and the most famous part is yet to come. If you enjoyed this chapter, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the founding of Rome. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay legendary. Welcome back to our series on the founding of Rome. In our last episode, we saw Romulus and Remus, now celebrated heroes, restore their grandfather Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa. The city rejoiced. Their long-lost princes had returned, and justice had been served. It seemed like the perfect fairy tale ending, but for 2 young men raised by the wild, whose veins pulsed with ambition and a sense of destiny. Settling into the comfortable but constrained life of a royal court was never going to be enough. Alba Longa was Numitor's city. It was a place of established traditions, of old families, and of rules written long before they were born. For Romulus and Remus, who had spent their lives making their own rules on the rough slopes of the Palatine Hill, the structured life of the city felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. They were respected, yes, but they were also just 2 princes among many. Their restless energy, the very quality that had allowed them to survive and thrive, now had no outlet. They would walk the polished streets of Alba Longa, hearing the whispers of courtiers and the polite greetings of citizens, but their hearts and minds would wander back to the banks of the Tiber. They remembered the feel of the wind whipping across the 7 hills, the scent of the river mud, and the freedom of the open sky. That was their true home. It was the place that had claimed them, where Chevalf had offered them life and a shepherd had given them a family. It was a land of raw potential, untamed and waiting. The idea began as a whisper between the 2 brothers, a shared glance, a mutual dissatisfaction with their current lives. Why should they live in the shadow of their grandfather's legacy when they could build their own? Why be princes in someone else's city when they could be kings of their own? The thought took root, growing from a fanciful notion into an unshakable conviction. They wouldn't just return to the hills of their youth, they would transform them. They envisioned a new city, rising from the very spot where they had been cast out to die. It would be a city unlike any other, not born of ancient tradition, but of divine will and human ambition. This wouldn't be just another settlement. It would be a city of destiny. It would be a monument to their survival, a testament to the favor of the gods who had clearly watched over them since their miraculous rescue from the river. This dream became their obsession. They began to speak of it openly. First, to their loyal band of shepherds and followers who had fought alongside them against Totesimen, who knew nothing but a life of hardship and who looked upon the twins as near divine leaders. The idea was electrifying. The promise of a new home, a city built by their own hands, where they would be the first citizens, was an irresistible call to adventure. They didn't want the comfortable life of Alba Longa any more than the twins did. They were pioneers, ready to follow their leaders into the wilderness. Soon, the dream spread beyond their immediate circle. It attracted the restless, the ambitious, and the dispossessed from Alba and the surrounding lands. People who felt constrained by the old ways, younger sons with no inheritance, and anyone looking for a fresh start were drawn to the twins' magnetic vision. They spoke of a city where merit would matter more than birth, where strength and courage would be the highest virtues. It was a powerful and seductive promise. Numitor, their grandfather, watched this growing movement with a mix of pride and concern. He saw the fire in his grandson's eyes, the same fire that had once burned in his own. He understood their desire to forge their own path. He knew he couldn't hold them in Alba. Their spirits were too wild, their destiny too great. To try and contain them would be like trying to cage the wind. So, with a heavy heart, but a sense of inevitability, Numitor gave them his blessing. He granted them permission to leave and to found their new city. He offered them resources, men, and supplies, hoping to give their ambitious project the best possible chance of success. He knew this wasn't just two boys chasing a fantasy. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the history of his people, a chapter he would not be a part of, but one he had helped to set in motion. With the king's blessing, the movement gained unstoppable momentum. A great procession began to form, a river of people flowing out of Alba, ready to trade the certainty of the old city for the promise of a new one. Romulus and Remus led the way, their hearts soaring with excitement and purpose. They were no longer just returned princes. They were founders, patriarchs of a new nation. They journeyed back to the familiar landscape along the Tiber. Standing atop the Palatine Hill, looking out over the marshes and the gentle slopes, they felt a profound sense of homecoming. This was the place, the sacred ground where their story had begun. Here, they would build their city, a city born from a dream, nurtured by ambition, and destined, they believed, for greatness. But as they stood there, two brothers united in a shared dream, a shadow was beginning to fall. The question was no longer asterisk. If asterisk, they would build a city, but asterisk, how asterisk? And more importantly, who would rule it? The very ambition that had brought them this far was about to set them on a collision course. The dream of a new city was beautiful and pure, but the reality of its creation would be fraught with conflict. The two brothers, once inseparable, were about to become rivals. The stage was set for a tragedy that would forever stain the foundations of their new home. What happens when two leaders share one dream? Join us next time as the brothers consult the gods, and the first fatal crack appears in their legendary partnership. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, so you don't miss the next chapter in the epic story of the founding of Rome. Welcome back to our journey through the legendary founding of Rome. Last time, we left the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, victorious, having restored their grandfather Numitor to the throne of Alba. But their story, and the story of Rome, is just beginning. The brothers, now heroes in their own right, were filled with a burning ambition. They didn't just want to serve under their grandfather, they yearned to forge their own destiny, to build a city that would echo their names through eternity. The question wasn't asterisk, if asterisk they would build a city, but asterisk, where asterisk? This single question would become the first crack in their fraternal bond, a crack that would tragically widen into a chasm. They returned to the very lands where they were raised by the she-wolf, the 7 hills by the Tiber River. This was their home, the place where their incredible journey began. It felt right. The landscape itself seemed to call to them, ripe with promise. But which of the 7 hills would be the heart of their new city? This is where the dispute began. Romulus, perhaps the more pragmatic and strategically minded of the two, set his sights on the Palatine Hill. It was a formidable choice. The Palatine was centrally located, with steep slopes that offered a natural defense against any potential attackers. From its summit, one could command a view of the entire area, including the crucial river crossing and the surrounding fertile plains. For Romulus, the Palatine was the logical, secure, and powerful foundation for a future empire. He could already envision the walls rising, the temples reaching for the sky. A city built to last, a city built for power. Remus, on the other hand, was drawn to the Palatine Hill. The Aventine, slightly to the south, was also a strong position. Perhaps Remus saw it as a place of greater opportunity. It was closer to the Tiber's main trading post, the Forum Boreum, and offered excellent access to the river trade. Maybe he saw a city built not just on military might, but on commerce and connection to the wider world. The Aventine was his vision, a bustling port city, open and prosperous. His heart was set, and he was just as stubborn and proud as his brother. The disagreement was immediate and fierce. Imagine the scene. Two young men, demigods in their own right, standing on the banks of the Tiber, pointing to two different hills, each utterly convinced of his own vision. Their followers, the shepherds and adventurers who had joined their cause, began to take sides. The camp was divided. What had been a united band of brothers was now splintered into factions, the Romulans and the Remus. The tension was palpable. Arguments broke out. Loyalties were tested. The dream of a shared city was beginning to sour into a bitter rivalry. Neither brother would yield. Romulus argued for the strategic superiority of the Palatine, for its defensibility. Remus countered with the commercial advantages of the Aventine, its access to trade and prosperity. Their words became heated. Their pride stung. They were twins, equals in birth and in valor. Yet now they stood as rivals. How could they resolve this? A physical fight between them would tear their followers apart completely and doom their enterprise before it even began. They were at an impasse, the future of their city hanging precariously in the balance. In a society steeped in religious belief, where the will of the gods was seen in every aspect of life, there was only one way to settle a dispute of this magnitude without resorting to bloodshed. They had to appeal to a higher authority. They agreed to let the gods themselves decide. The method they chose was a sacred and ancient Etruscan practice. Ogiri was the art of interpreting the will of the gods by observing the flight of birds. It was a solemn and respected ritual. The direction of their flight, the number of birds, the type of bird, and the sounds they made all were considered divine messages, omens to be carefully deciphered by a trained priest, an augur. For the brothers, this was the perfect solution. It took the decision out of their mortal, prideful hands and placed it into the realm of the divine. The god's choice would be final and unarguable. So, they prepared for the sacred rite. They agreed that each brother would take his stand on his chosen hill. Romulus ascended the Palatine, and Remus climbed the Aventine. They each established a sacred space, Templum Asterisk, which was not a building but a ritualistically defined area of the sky they would observe. From sunrise to sunset, they would sit, patient and silent, their eyes scanning the heavens, waiting for the gods to send their winged messengers. The fate of their city, and their own personal fates, now rested on the flight of birds. The air was thick with anticipation. Their followers waited below, hushed and anxious, watching the two lone figures silhouetted against the sky on their respective hills. Who would the gods favor? Would they see eagles, the birds of Jupiter, king of the gods? Or would it be vultures, birds, associated with death and battle, but also powerful omens? Every shepherd and warrior held their breath. This was more than just choosing a location. It was a divine election. The brother who received the favorable omen would not only get to found the city, but would also be its rightful king. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, the vigil continued. The brothers sat, their gazes locked on the sky, their minds focused, praying for a sign. The future of the world's greatest empire was about to be decided not by armies or arguments, but by a silent, patient watch of the heavens. What they saw next would seal their destinies and set in motion a chain of events that would end in triumph for one and tragedy for the other. And that is where we will pick up next time. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the founding of Rome. If you enjoyed this story and want to find out what the birds revealed, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. We love having you here as part of our history community. See you next time. Hello history lovers, and welcome back to our series on the founding of Rome. Today, we dive into a pivotal, heart-wrenching moment. The omen that turned brother against brother. If you've been following the journey of Romulus and Remus, you know they've overcome incredible odds together. But now, as they stand on the verge of creating a city, their unity is about to be tested like never before. So, the big question was, Who would be the rightful founder of their new city? Who would give it his name and rule it? Unable to agree, they decided to leave the decision to the gods through a practice known as Oguri eating, divine will, by observing the flight of birds. This wasn't just some casual bird watch. For the ancient world, this was a sacred and binding verdict from the heavens. They chose 2 separate hills for their vigil. Remus ascended the Palatine Hill, while Romulus took his position on the Palatine Hill. The tension must have been palpable. 2 brothers, bound by blood and a shared, miraculous past, now waiting for a sign that would place one above the other. They had survived a death sentence as infants, been raised by a she-wolf, and reclaimed their grandfather's throne together. But building a city, that was a prize only one could claim. The vigil began. Who would the gods favor? The city and their fates hung in the balance. As dawn broke, the sky remained empty. Hours crept by under the Italian sun. Imagine the thoughts racing through their minds. Each brother, alone on his hill, staring at the vast, silent sky, praying for a sign. Then it happened. A cry of triumph from the Palatine Hill. Remus had seen it first. 6 magnificent vultures, soaring in the sky. In the ancient world, vultures were powerful symbols, birds associated with gods of war and prophecy. 6 was a significant number. For Remus and his followers, the case was closed. He had the priority of the sighting. The gods had spoken, and they had chosen him. His supporters erupted in cheers. Remus must have felt a surge of destiny, believing he was the chosen one. But the story doesn't end there. Just as the celebration began on the Aventine, a shout echoed from the Palatine. It was Romulus, and his claim was even more astounding. He hadn't seen 6 vultures. He had seen 12. A full double the number Remus saw. Suddenly, the clear sign from the gods was mired in ambiguity. This is where the argument, the fatal argument, began. Remus's camp argued that priority mattered most. He saw the birds asterisk. First, asterisk. It was a clear, sequential sign. The first message from the gods is the true one. They insisted that Romulus's later sighting, even of a larger number, was irrelevant. The contest was already won. However, Romulus and his supporters had a powerful counter-argument. They claimed that the sheer number was the decisive factor. 12 vultures versus 6. It wasn't even a contest. The gods weren't just giving a sign. They were making an overwhelming statement of power and favor. Double the number meant double the blessing, double the authority. Who could argue with such a clear show of divine preference? This is the crux of the tragedy. Both brothers had a legitimate claim. Was it the timing, or was it the magnitude of the sign? The divine message, meant to bring clarity, had instead sown the seeds of a bitter dispute. Their interpretations were colored by ambition and pride. What should have been a sacred resolution became a source of mortal conflict. The argument festered. The brotherly bond, once strong enough to defy a king and reclaim a kingdom, began to fracture under the weight of pride. Neither would back down. Remus was convinced of his right by being first. Romulus was certain of his destiny because of the superior number. The trust between them evaporated, replaced by suspicion and resentment. Their followers, loyal to their respective leaders, fanned the flames of the rivalry. This wasn't just a squabble anymore. It was a schism. The 2 groups began to work separately. Romulus, not waiting for a resolution, started to lay the foundations of his city on the Palatine Hill. He began digging a trench, the *POM, *ERIUM*, which would mark the sacred boundary of his future city. In ancient tradition, this was a deeply religious act. Crossing this line with weapons, or with ill intent, was a sacrilege of the highest order. Remus, watching from his own hill, was filled with scorn and jealousy. He saw his brother's actions as the ultimate act of arrogance. Who was Romulus to declare himself the winner and begin building without a consensus? To mock his brother's efforts, Remus approached the half-built wall in the shallow trench. What happened next is the most tragic moment of their story. In a fit of derision, Remus leaped over the trench in the fledgling wall, taunting his brother. "Is this how you'll protect your city?" This act of contempt was more than an insult. It was a profound sacrilege. He had violated the sacred boundary, symbolically demonstrating its weakness and defiling the divine act of its creation. For Romulus, this was the final straw. His brother had not only challenged his authority, but had openly mocked the gods and the sanctity of his future city. Blazing with fury, in a moment that would echo through eternity, Romulus struck his brother down. Some versions of the myth say Romulus killed Remus himself. Others say it was one of his followers, but the result was the same. Remus, the boy who survived the river, the boy raised by a wolf, lay dead at his brother's feet, the first bloodshed for the future of Rome. The city had been consecrated, not with wine or holy water, but with the blood of a brother. Romulus stood as the sole founder, his victory absolute, but paid for at a terrible price. He had his city, but he had lost his twin, his other half. The foundation of Rome, a city that would grow to rule the world, was built upon an act of fratricide. This dark beginning would haunt the city's history, a constant reminder that great power often comes from great and terrible sacrifice. And so, the city was named Rome, after Romulus, but the shadow of Remus would forever linger over its 7 hills. It is a powerful and cautionary tale about how ambition and pride can corrupt even the purest of bonds. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's most foundational myths. It really makes you think, doesn't it? If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our journey through ancient Rome. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of Roman history. Today, we stand at a precipice, a moment so pivotal and tragic that it echoes through the very foundation of Rome itself. We arrive at the story of 2 brothers, bound by blood and prophecy, yet destined to be torn apart by ambition. This is the tale of Romulus and Remus, and the heartbreaking climax that sealed the fate of a future empire. Last time, we left the twin brothers at a crucial juncture. Raised by a she-wolf, and then a humble shepherd, they had reclaimed their royal heritage, restored their grandfather to the throne, and now sought to build a city of their own. They returned to the very hills where they were once left to die, the place where their incredible story began. But the gods, it seemed, had a plan that would test their bond like never before. They agreed to settle the question of who would be king and give the city his name through Auguria's sacred practice of interpreting the flight of birds. Remus, positioned on the Palatine Hill, was the first to see a sign. 6 majestic vultures soaring across the sky. He was ecstatic, believing the matter was settled. But shortly after, on the Palatine Hill, Romulus saw a flock of 12. Double the number. The dispute erupted immediately. Remus argued he saw his birds first. Romulus countered that his greater numbers signified a greater divine favor. The followers of each brother took up the argument, and the once unified group fractured into 2 rival factions. The dream of a shared city was beginning to crumble. Despite the unresolved tension, Romulus, fueled by the conviction that he was the chosen one, decided to proceed. He began the sacred ritual of founding his city on the Palatine Hill. He yoked a white cow and a white bull to a plow with a bronze blade and began to carve the asterisk. Pomerium asterisk, the sacred boundary of his new city. This was no ordinary furrow. It was a magical and religious line, a demarcation between the civilized space within and the wild world without. As he plowed, he lifted the blade at specific points to mark where the city gates would be. This line was inviolable. To cross it with hostile intent was the highest form of sacrilege. As the wall, little more than a mound of earth and a shallow trench at this early stage, began to take shape, Remus watched from a distance, his heart a cocktail of bitterness, envy, and brotherly rivalry. The sight of Romulus's city rising without him was more than he could bear. The joy they had shared in their victories now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the sting of being second best. He approached the burgeoning wall, his face a mask of scorn. "You call this a wall?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "A fine defense for your new city, brother? A fox could leap over it." The workers paused, their eyes darting between the 2 twins. The air grew thick with unspoken history, the sheared cradle, the she-wolf's den, the battles fought side. All of it hung in the balance. Then, in a fateful act of defiance and mockery, Remus gathered himself and leaped effortlessly over the half-finished wall and the sacred furrow. He landed inside the boundary, a triumphant, mocking grin on his face. He had not just jumped a small ditch. He had violated the most sacred law of the new city. He had challenged its divine protection and, in doing so, challenged Romulus's very authority as its founder and king. For Romulus, this was the ultimate betrayal. It was not just a childish taunt. It was a desecration. It was a sign that his own brother would not respect the laws upon which their future depended. In that instant, a terrible, cold fury seized him. The love for his twin was eclipsed by his duty to his city and his gods. With a cry of rage and anguish, Romulus raised his weapon. Some say it was a spade. Others, a sword, and struck his brother down. As Remus fell to the ground, the life draining from his eyes, Romulus stood over him, his voice trembling but resolute, and uttered the chilling words that would become a cornerstone of Roman law and ideology. "So perish all who ever cross my walls." A deathly silence fell upon the Palatine Hill. The cheers of the workers died in their throats. They stared in horror at the scene before them. One founder lying dead, slain by the other. The Shivolf's cub had killed his own littermate. The joy of founding a new home was instantly poisoned by the bitter grief of fratricida, killing of a brother. The moment was heavy with a terrible finality. Rome was born, but its birth was stained with the blood of one of its founding fathers. Romulus was now the sole ruler, the undisputed king. He had secured his city, but at what cost? He had lost the one person who had been with him since birth. The myth tells us that Romulus was immediately consumed by grief. He had acted in a moment of rage, a protector of his city's divine law, but the man who lay dead at his feet was still his brother. This act, this foundational murder, became a defining element of the Roman character. It established an unyielding principle. The security and sanctity of Rome were paramount. Above all else, even family ties. The state came first. This story would be told and retold for 1,000 years, a constant reminder of the brutal sacrifice made at the city's inception and the unwavering resolve required to protect it. Romulus mourned his brother deeply, but the work had to continue. The city needed to be built. It was named, as fate had decreed, Rome. Romulus would go on to be a great king, a warrior, and a lawgiver who would populate a city and establish its most important institutions. But the shadow of Remus would forever linger. The city founded on the Palatine Hill would grow to conquer the world, but it carried within its heart the memory of a brother's blood, a tragic and powerful reminder of the price of destiny. And so, the foundation of Rome is not a simple story of heroic triumph, but a complex tragedy of love, ambition, and sacrifice. It's a testament to the idea that great things are often born from great pain, and that the path to glory is often paved with sorrow. Thank you for joining us for this pivotal chapter in Rome's story. It's a dark and difficult part of the legend, but essential to understanding the mindset of the civilization that would follow. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from history. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this tragic event in the comments below. Until next time. Stay curious. Hello, history lovers, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're journeying back in time, all the way to the very beginning of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. We're talking about the founding of Rome. The year is 753 BC, a date that would echo through millennia as the birthday of the eternal city. Picture this. Two brothers, Romulus and Remus, descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, abandoned as infants and miraculously saved and suckled by a Their story is the stuff of legend, a dramatic prelude to an even more dramatic destiny. After reclaiming their grandfather's throne in Alba Longa, the twin brothers set out to found a city of their own. They chose a strategic location on the Tiber River, a cluster of 7 hills that offered natural defenses and access to trade routes. But a fierce rivalry soon erupted between them. Who would be the true founder? Who would give the new city its name? To settle the dispute, they turned to augury, the ancient practice of interpreting the will of the gods by observing the flight of birds. Remus, standing on the Palatine Hill, was the first to see a sign. 6 vultures. A good omen. Surely, but then, Romulus, on the neighboring Palatine Hill, saw a flock of 12, a superior sign. The gods, it seemed, had made their choice. Romulus was destined to be the founder. He immediately began to plow a furrow around the Palatine Hill, marking the sacred boundary, the asterisk, POM, EOM, asterisk, of his new city. This is where the story takes its tragic and most famous turn. Remus, resentful and mocking his brother's supposedly sacred wall, leaped over the freshly plowed boundary. In a fit of rage at this act of sacrilege, Romulus struck his brother down, declaring, "So shall it be for all who dare to cross my walls." It was a brutal, foundational act, symbolizing that the defense and integrity of the city were paramount, even above family ties. With his brother gone, Romulus stood alone as the sole founder and first king. He named the city Roma after himself, a testament to his ambition and divine favor. And so, in 753 BCE, on the Palatine Hill, Rome was born. It began not as a grand empire, but as a small settlement, a single hill fortified by a symbolic wall and consecrated by a brother's blood. But Romulus knew a city was more than just walls and a name. It needed people. To populate his fledgling city, he declared it an asylum, a sanctuary for fugitives, exiles, and runaways from neighboring lands. People from all walks of life, seeking a fresh start, flocked to Rome. This created a diverse, if somewhat rough, population of men. It was a city of ambition, a melting pot from its very first day. However, there was a major problem. There were no women. A city without families has no future. Romulus's solution was as cunning as it was controversial. He organized a grand festival, inviting the neighboring Sabine tribe to a celebration in Rome. In the middle of the festivities, at a prearranged signal, the Roman men seized the unmarried Sabine women and carried them off. This event, known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, sparked a furious war. The Sabine king, Titus Titius, led his army to attack Rome, even managing to capture the Palatine Hill. The battle raged in the valley that would later become the Roman Forum. Just as the fighting reached its most desperate point, the Sabine women themselves intervened. Torn between their fathers and brothers on one side and their new Roman husbands on the other, they ran into the heart of the battle. Holding up their newborn children, they pleaded for peace, crying that they did not wish to be widowed and orphaned in a single day. Their courageous act stopped the fighting. The soldiers, moved by their bravery and the sight of their new kin, laid down their arms. Peace was made, and a remarkable agreement was reached. The Romans and the Sabines would unite as one people. Romulus and the Sabine king, Titus Tius, would rule jointly. This union was a pivotal moment. It not only ended the war, but also established a crucial precedent for Rome's future growth, incorporating conquered peoples rather than simply destroying them. This policy of integration would become a cornerstone of Roman expansion and strength for centuries to come. Romulus went on to rule for many years, establishing some of Rome's most enduring institutions. He created the Roman legions, the military force that would conquer the known world. He also established the Senate, a council of elders, or patres, whose descendants would become the patrician class. These foundational political and military structures would shape the Roman Republic and, later, the Empire. The end of Romulus's reign is as legendary as its beginning. One day, while reviewing his troops, a sudden, violent storm erupted. A thick cloud enveloped the king, and when it cleared, Romulus was gone. Some said he was taken up to the heavens to become the god Quirinus, a divine protector of the Roman people. Others whispered a darker rumor that the senators, tired of his rule, had murdered him during the storm and dismembered his body. Whatever the truth, the legend of Romulus's divine ascension solidified his status as the revered father of Rome. His story, from the she-wolf to his disappearance into the storm, became the central myth of Roman identity. It was a story of divine will, human ambition, fierce loyalty to the city, and the brutal necessities of power. And so, from these mythic and violent beginnings, the city of Rome was established in 753 BC. It was a small settlement on the Tiber, founded by a legendary king who mixed divine favor with ruthless pragmatism. It was a city born of fratricide, populated by outcasts, and secured through abduction and forced union. Yet, from this chaotic start, something extraordinary grew. A village that would become a republic that would become an empire that would shape the course of Western civilization forever. The story of Romulus and the birth of Rome is more than just a myth. It's a powerful statement about Roman character and destiny. It tells us that from the very beginning, Rome was destined for greatness, divinely ordained but built by human hands, through both noble and terrible deeds. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, back to the founding of the Eternal City. If you enjoyed this dive into ancient history, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the past. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Let us know in the comments what part of Roman history you'd like to explore next. Until then, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of history, to the very foundations of one of the world's greatest empires. Today, we delve into a pivotal moment. The building of a nation from a mere settlement on a hill. After the dramatic founding of Rome, Romulus faced a monumental challenge. He had city, a name, and a vision. But a city is nothing without its people. How do you populate a new settlement in a land already filled with established tribes and ancient cities? Where do you find the souls willing to bet their future on a fledgling town built on 7 hills? Romulus's solution was as audacious as it was brilliant, setting a precedent that would define Rome for centuries to come. He didn't seek alliances with the wealthy or treaties with the powerful. Instead, Romulus cast his net wide, sending out a call to the forgotten, the displaced, and the ambitious. He declared Rome an asylum, a sanctuary. He opened his gates to anyone and everyone seeking a fresh start, regardless of their past or their social standing. Imagine the scene. Messengers riding out from the Palatine Hill, their voices carrying a promise of new life. The message spread like wildfire through the Italian peninsula. Who answered this call? The downtrodden, the outcasts, refugees fleeing conflict in their own lands, exiles banished from their homes for political or personal reasons, runaway slaves dreaming of freedom, and wanderers who belonged nowhere and everywhere. They came from all corners of Latium and beyond. They were farmers who had lost their land, merchants with empty pockets, soldiers without a war to fight, and families simply searching for a place to call their own. They were a motley crew, a patchwork of humanity. To the established, aristocratic cities surrounding them, this influx of undesirables was a cause for scorn and suspicion. They looked at Rome and saw not a burgeoning city, but a den of vagabonds. They underestimated the power of hope. They failed to see the raw potential in this collection of disparate souls united by a common dream. For Romulus, this wasn't just about numbers. It was about forging a new kind of society. He understood that these individuals, having lost everything, had the most to gain. They had a hunger, a drive, and a fierce loyalty to the city that gave them a second chance. They weren't bound by old traditions or stifling class structures. In Rome, what mattered wasn't where you came from, but what you could contribute. Your worth was measured by your strength, your skill, and your commitment to the community. This radical policy of open arms transformed Rome overnight. The sparse settlement began to swell, huts and homesteads spreading across the hills. The sounds of 100 different dialects filled the air. The marketplace bustled with unfamiliar faces, and a vibrant, chaotic energy pulsed through the newly laid streets. This wasn't a homogeneous, carefully curated population. It was a melting pot, and from this crucible of diversity, a new identity began to form. The Roman citizen. The early Romans were tough, resilient, and fiercely independent because they had to be. They were building their world from the ground up, side by side, with strangers who quickly became neighbors, allies, and friends. They learned to rely on each other, forging bonds of camaraderie that transcended their different origins. This shared experience of creating something new, of defending their fledgling home against a skeptical world, became the glue that held the city together. It was this very diversity that became Rome's greatest strength. The city gained a wealth of skills, knowledge, and traditions from its new inhabitants. Farmers brought new agricultural techniques, craftsmen introduced different styles, and warriors shared diverse combat tactics. This constant infusion of new blood and new ideas kept the city dynamic and adaptable, preventing it from becoming stagnant. Think about it. From its very first generation, Rome was a city built on the idea of inclusion. It was a haven for all who sought a new beginning. This foundational principle, established by Romulus, created a powerful sense of civic pride and a unique social fabric. It sent a clear message. Rome is for the bold, the resilient, and the determined. It is a place where your past does not define your future. Of course, this rapid expansion came with its own set of problems, which we will explore in our next chapter. Growing a population is one thing. Organizing it, governing it, and ensuring its survival is another challenge entirely. But in these early days, under the ambitious leadership of Romulus, the city of Rome was not just being built with bricks and mortar. It was being built with people, with hope, and with the revolutionary idea that a nation's strength lies not in its purity, but in its ability to embrace the stranger and offer a home to the homeless. This was the true foundation of Rome, a legacy of strength through diversity that would echo through the ages. Thank you so much for joining me today as we witnessed the birth of the Roman people. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories from the dawn of civilization. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss what happens next. See you in the next video. Hello history lovers and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're rediving into one of ancient Rome's most dramatic and foundational myths, the story of the Sabine women. It is a tale that starts with desperation and violence, but ends in an unexpected and powerful act of peace. So, grab your virtual toga, and let's journey back to the very beginnings of the Eternal City. Imagine this. Rome, in its infancy, is a city bursting with ambition. Founded by the legendary Romulus, it's a magnet for men from all over the region of outcasts, and those seeking a fresh start. They're building a powerful new society, but they have a huge problem. A critical shortage that threatens their entire future. There are hardly any women. Without families, a city is just a temporary settlement. It has no legacy, no future generation to carry the torch. Romulus, ever the pragmatist, knew this. He tried diplomacy first. He sent envoys to neighboring tribes, including the powerful Sabines, proposing alliances but the established communities looked down on this upstart city of roof-and-tumble men. They refused, one and all. They mocked Rome, asking if they had opened an asylum for women as well. Rome's very survival was on the line, and diplomacy had failed. So, Romulus devised a daring and controversial plan. He announced a magnificent festival in honor of the god Neptune, complete with spectacular games and celebrations. He sent out invitations far and wide, and his neighbors, their suspicions lulled by the promise of a grand spectacle, came in droves. The Sabines, in particular, arrived with their families, their wives and daughters, eager to see the sights of the new city. The festival began with all the pomp and circumstance Rome could muster. The air was filled with excitement. Then, at a prearranged signal from Romulus, the scene shifted in an instant. The Roman men drew their swords, not to attack the Sabine men, but to seize their unmarried daughters. Chaos erupted. Fathers and brothers fought to protect their women, but they were caught off guard and outnumbered. In the confusion, the Roman men carried the terrified Sabine women away into their homes. This event, known to history as the rape of the Sabine women, is shocking to our modern sensibilities. The term rape in its Latin origin, *raptio*, meant abduction or kidnapping. But the traumatic and non-consensual nature of the act is undeniable. The Sabine men, defeated and humiliated, retreated to their lands, vowing to return and exact a terrible revenge. Like in Rome, the situation was tense. The abducted women were rightfully terrified and grief-stricken. This is where Romulus showed a different side to his leadership. He went to the women personally. He didn't just command them, he tried to persuade them. He explained Rome's desperate situation and promised them that they would not be treated as captives, but as respected wives and citizens. He assured them they would share in the fortunes of Rome, and their children would be the heirs to this new, great city. The Roman men, following his lead, also tried to win over their new partners with kindness and promises of a shared future. Years pass. The initial shock and trauma slowly gave way to a new reality. The Sabine women, now Roman matrons, had children. They had built homes and families. They were no longer just captives. They were mothers, wives, and an integral part of Roman society. They had sons who were Roman by birth, but Sabine by blood. Their loyalties were now divided. Meanwhile, the Sabine men had not forgotten. Led by their king, Titus Tatius, they had spent years building their strength and marshaling their forces. Finally, they marched on Rome, ready to reclaim their daughters and their honor. The battle was fierce, fought in the very valley that would later become the Roman Forum. The fighting was personal and brutal, as men who were now brothers-in-law fought to the death. The conflict raged, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The future of Rome hung in the balance. Just as the battle reached its bloodiest and most desperate point, an incredible thing happened. The gates of the city opened, and the Sabine women themselves, their hair undone in a sign of mourning, rushed onto the battlefield. They didn't run to one side or the other. They ran directly into the deadly space between the two warring armies, holding their young children aloft. They cried out to their fathers and brothers on one side, and to their husbands on the other. "Why are you doing this?" They pleaded. "If it's us you're angry about, then turn your swords on us. We are the cause of this war. It is better for us to die than to live as widows or orphans." They stood between their Sabine families and their Roman families, a living bridge of shared blood and affection. They presented their children, the grandchildren of the Sabines and the sons of the Romans, asking how their grandfathers could kill their fathers, or how their fathers could kill their grandfathers. The sight was so powerful, so emotionally charged, that it stopped the soldiers in their tracks. The clashing of swords ceased. The shouts of war died down. The men looked at these women, their daughters, their sisters, their wives, and at the innocent children they held. They saw the impossible position the women were in, torn between the men they loved. Their rage cooled, replaced by a profound sense of shame and sorrow. Slowly, the generals, Romulus and Titus Tatius, walked to the center of the field. Moved by the bravery and wisdom of the women, they didn't just declare a truce. They did something far more radical. They agreed to peace, but not just peace. They agreed to unite their two peoples into one. The Sabines would move to Rome, and Romulus and Titus Tatius would rule together as joint kings. And so, through the courageous intervention of the women they had once violently abducted, Rome didn't just survive, it doubled in strength. The Sabines became Romans, their culture and people integrated into the fabric of the city. This union was a pivotal moment, shaping Rome's future character as a society that grew by absorbing and assimilating other peoples. The story of the Sabine women is complex. It begins with an act of brutal pragmatism but concludes with a powerful lesson in peacemaking and reconciliation. It shows that even from the most violent of beginnings, unity can be forged. For the Romans, it became a foundational myth that explained their origins and celebrated the virtue and influence of Roman matrons. It was a testament to the idea that family and the bonds of love could be stronger than the sword. What do you think of this incredible story? A brutal act of survival or a masterstroke of nation building? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this trip back in time, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history. We'll see you next time. Upbeat historical the intro music begins and then fades to a background hum. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Today, we're diving deep into the very heart of Rome's founding, to a time of myth, legend, and the dawn of an empire. We're talking about the man who laid the first stone, drew the first boundary, and forged a city from sheer will. This is the story of Romulus, the first king of Rome. After the dramatic and tragic founding of the city, with the shadow of his brother Remus's death looming over him, Romulus faced an immense task. He wasn't just building a city of brick and mortar. He was building a society. He had a collection of shepherds, outcasts, and runaways on the Palatine Hill. How do you turn a ragtag group like that into the future masters of the world? You need order, you need structure, and you need a leader who is both wise and unyieldingly firm. Romulus was that leader. His first order of business was to establish a framework for governance. He knew he couldn't rule alone. He needed advisors, men of experience and wisdom, who could help guide the fledgling state. So, he selected 100 of the most respected elder citizens, the heads of the leading families, and formed the very first Roman Senate. These men were called paters, or fathers, not just for their age, but because they were to be the fathers of the state. This wasn't just a council, it was the bedrock of Roman political life, an institution that would endure for 1,000 years, shaping the destiny of millions. The creation of the Senate was a stroke of genius, distributing power and ensuring that the new city had a collective wisdom to draw upon. Next, Romulus turned his attention to the people. He divided them into 30 groups called curiae. This wasn't just an administrative move. It was a way to foster a sense of community and shared identity. Each curia had its own meeting places, its own festivals, and its own priests. By breaking down the larger population into these smaller, more manageable units, Romulus ensured that every citizen felt like they belonged to something greater than themselves. It was a brilliant piece of social engineering, creating bonds of loyalty that went beyond simple allegiance to a king. It was loyalty to your neighbors, your curia, and ultimately, to Rome itself. But a city, especially one surrounded by wary and often hostile neighbors, needs more than just laws and councils. It needs strength. It needs an army. Romulus, a man raised in the wild and a natural warrior, knew this better than anyone. He organized Rome's first military force, the legion. He decreed that every able-bodied man was a soldier, ready to defend the city at a moment's notice. The early Roman army wasn't a professional force like the one we imagine under Caesar. It was a citizen militia, but Romulus organized it with meticulous care. He established a clear chain of command, with tribunes and centurions, instilling a discipline that would become the hallmark of Roman military might for centuries to come. He understood that Rome's survival depended on its ability to project power and defend its walls. This fusion of citizen and soldier was fundamental to the Roman character, and to protect himself, and to signify his royal authority. Romulus established the lictor. He was always accompanied by 12 of these men, each carrying the fasces, a bundle of rods with an axe bound in the middle. This was a powerful and terrifying symbol. The rods represented the king's power to punish, to maintain order through force if necessary, while the axe symbolized his power over life and death. When Romulus walked through the streets of his new city, flanked by the lictor, the message was clear. Here was a king who held absolute authority, a man not to be trifled with. He was stern, yes, but in these chaotic early days, that sternness provided a necessary stability. Now, a society is held together by more than just laws and armies. It's held together by shared beliefs, by a sacred connection to the divine. Romulus knew that to truly unite his people and give their new city a soul, he needed to establish its religious life. He was not just a king and a general. He became Rome's first high priest. He meticulously organized the sacred rituals and the priesthoods that would define the Roman spirit. He established the worship of the gods who had watched over his own miraculous birth, particularly Jupiter, the king of the gods, to whom he dedicated a temple on the Palatine Hill. He appointed priests, the flamens, to serve specific deities, and he created the College of the Augurs, who were tasked with interpreting the will of the gods by observing the flight of birds, the very same method he and Remus had used to decide who would found the city. This act rooted Roman governance in divine approval. Every major decision, from going to war to holding an election, would first require consulting the gods. This wasn't just superstition. It was a way of ensuring that every action the state took was seen as pious and fated. It gave the Romans an unshakable confidence, a belief that they were a chosen people, destined for greatness. These sacred rituals became the invisible threads that wove the fabric of Roman society together, providing comfort in times of crisis and a sense of purpose in times of peace. Through these foundational acts, creating the Senate, organizing the people, building the army, and establishing the state religion. Romulus transformed a chaotic settlement into a functioning city-state. He was a complex figure, no doubt. The legends paint him as both a divine founder and a ruthless king. He was wise enough to create institutions that would outlive him by centuries, yet stern enough to enforce his will with an iron fist. He was a lawgiver, a general, a priest, and a visionary. He didn't just build a city. He crafted an identity. He forged the very soul of Rome, a spirit of order, discipline, piety, and an unshakable belief in its own destiny. The ruler Romulus wasn't just a chapter in Rome's history. It was the blueprint for everything that was to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the foundations of Rome. The story, of course, doesn't end here. The city is built, but now it must grow and survive in a dangerous world. If you enjoyed this video and want to see what happens next, please hit that like button. And do not forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. We love having you as part of our history community. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, history lovers and myth enthusiasts. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we re-diving into one of ancient Rome's most enduring mysteries. The final chapter of its legendary founder, Romulus. Was it a calculated political assassination, or a divine ascension into godhood? Let's unravel the story together. For 37 years, Romulus had reigned over the city he founded. He was a king forged in conflict, a brilliant military strategist who expanded Rome's borders and shaped its earliest laws and customs. He established the Senate, created the legions, and laid the very foundation of what would become the world's greatest empire. Under his rule, Rome grew from a small settlement on the Palatine Hill into a formidable power in the Italian peninsula. He was more than a king. He was a living symbol of Rome itself, the father of his people. But every story has an ending, and Romulus is perhaps the most dramatic of all. The year is 717 BC. Romulus, now in his mid-50s, is conducting a public assembly on the Campus Martis, the Field of Mars, just outside the city walls. He's reviewing his troops, a scene of regal authority he'd enacted countless times before. The sun is high, the air is thick with the murmur of the crowd, and the king stands before his senators and soldiers. Then, without warning, the sky darkens. A terrifying storm descends upon the field. It's not just rain, it's a tempest of supernatural fury. Gale-force winds howl, lightning cracks the sky, and thunder roars like the anger of the gods. Panic erupts. The common people flee in terror, seeking shelter from the celestial onslaught. The senators, however, huddle closer to their king, a protective circle around the man who made them. When the storm finally subsides, and the sun breaks through the clouds again, an eerie silence falls over the Campus Martis. The people cautiously return, their eyes searching for their king. But the royal throne is empty. Romulus is gone. He has vanished without a trace. No body, no blood, no sign of a struggle. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the very fabric of the storm. The initial reaction is pure chaos and confusion. Where is the king? Did he run? Was he struck by lightning? The senators, who are the last to see him, offer a simple, yet extraordinary explanation. They claim that Romulus was lifted into the sky, carried away in the storm cloud by his father, the war god Mars. They insist he did not die, but ascended to the heavens to become a god himself. This proclamation was met with deep suspicion. The common people, the plebeians, had long felt a growing resentment towards the Senate. They saw the senators, the patricians, as arrogant and power-hungry. Murmurs began to spread through the city. The story of a divine ascension seemed a little too convenient. Had the senators, tired of Romulus's absolute power and perhaps his increasing favor towards the common folk, used the cover of the storm to commit regicide? The theory was simple and brutal. They had murdered their king, dismembered his body, and hidden the pieces beneath their robes to dispose of them later. The storm was the perfect cover, a divine alibi for a very human crime. For a time, Rome teetered on the brink of civil war, a city divided between faith and suspicion. Just as tensions reached their breaking point, a respected nobleman named Proclus Julius stepped forward with a story that would change everything. Proclus claimed that as he was walking into Rome at dawn, a divine figure appeared before him. It was Romulus, but transformed taller, more majestic, and clad in shining armor. According to Proclus, Romulus declared, "Go, tell the Romans that the gods will it, that my Rome shall be the capital of the world. So let them cherish the art of war, and let them know and teach their children that no human strength can resist Roman arms." With this divine mandate delivered, the figure of Romulus ascended once more into the heavens. Proclus's testimony, given his honorable reputation, was enough to quell the unrest. His vision confirmed the senator's account and calmed the people's fears. The Romans embraced the idea that their founder had not been murdered, but had become a deity, and so the worship of a new god began. Romulus was given the divine name Quirinus, an ancient Sabine deity of war who was now syncretized with Rome's founder. A temple was erected in his honor on the Palatine Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. Quirinus became one of the archaic triad, a trinity of gods alongside Jupiter and Mars, representing the civic, religious, and military aspects of Roman life. He was the protector of the Roman people, the deified embodiment of the Roman citizen in his civil capacity. For centuries, Romans would offer prayers to Quirinus, believing their founder was watching over them from the heavens, guiding their destiny. The story of his ascension became a cornerstone of Roman identity, a powerful myth that reinforced their belief in their own divine favor and manifest destiny. So, what really happened on that stormy day? Did the senators murder their king and invent a story to cover their tracks? This is the rationale, historical explanation favored by many scholars. Political assassinations were certainly not uncommon in the ancient world, and Romulus's long reign and absolute power could easily have bred resentment among the aristocracy. The story of the senators hiding body parts under their togas is gruesome, but it speaks to the deep distrust between the social classes in early Rome. The storm provided the perfect opportunity, a chaotic moment where a king could disappear and a new political order could be established without a clear line of succession. Or should we consider the alternative? Did Romulus send the son of a god and a Vestal virgin, a man nursed by a she-wolf, truly complete his earthly journey and return to the heavens? For the ancient Romans, this was not just a story, it was a matter of faith. Their worldview was steeped in the divine. Gods walked among mortals, heroes were born from divine unions, and miracles were a part of history. From their perspective, the ascension of their city's founder was a logical and fitting end to his extraordinary life. It was the ultimate validation of Rome's special place in the world. It elevated their city's origin from a mere historical event to a sacred epic, proving that Rome itself was divinely ordained. Ultimately, the death of Romulus remains shrouded in the mists of legend. Whether he was a victim of political conspiracy or a hero who became a god, his disappearance marked the end of Rome's mythical founding era and the beginning of its next chapter. The empty throne he left behind would not be filled by another king for some time, leading to a period known as the Interregna, where senators ruled in rotation until a new leader, Numa Pompilius, was chosen. Romulus's legacy, however, was immortal. He was the eternal founder, the divine protector, the very spirit of Rome. His story, a blend of history and myth, tells us as much about the Romans' aspirations and beliefs as it does about the man himself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into one of history's greatest mysteries. What do you believe happened to Romulus? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And do you not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of ancient history. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever wondered how the greatest empire in history began? It wasn't with a grand army or a powerful king, but with 2 bros, abandoned at birth, suckled by a This is the story of Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of Rome, and their legacy is a tale of destiny, brotherly love, and ultimately, heart-wrenching tragedy. Imagined infants, cast adrift on the turbulent waters of the Tiber River, left to the whims of fate. Their very survival was a miracle, a sign that the gods had a special plan for them. Found and nurtured by the she-wolf Lupa, and later raised by the humble shepherd Faustulus and his wife, the boys grew into strong, natural leaders. They were inseparable, 2 halves of a whole, their bond forged in the wild hills of ancient Italy. They commanded respect and loyalty, not through a royal title, but through their raw charisma and courage. They were protectors of the weak, champions of the shepherds. Their names whispered with a mix of awe and admiration, but destiny, as it often does, had a grander, more complex design. As young men, they learned of their true heritage. They were the grandsons of Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa, who had been usurped by his cruel brother, Romulus. Driven by justice and a sense of duty, Romulus and Remus rallied their followers, stormed the palace, and restored their grandfather to his throne. It was a heroic victory, a triumphant return for the lost princes. It seemed like the perfect end to a fairy tale, but for them, it was just the beginning. They were not content to simply live as princes in another man's city. They felt a calling, a pull, to create something of their own, a city that would reflect their strength and vision. They returned to the very place where they had been saved, the 7 hills overlooking the Tiber. This was their sacred ground, the cradle of their second chance at life. Here, they would build their city. Here, their legacy would be forged. But this is where the bright tale of brotherhood begins to darken. A rivalry, like a small, insidious seed, began to sprout between them. They couldn't agree on which hill to build their city. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, while Remus chose the Aventine Hill. To settle the dispute, they turned to the gods, seeking a sign through augury, the practice of interpreting the flight of birds. Remus was the first to see a sign. 6 vultures, a good omen. But then, Romulus saw a more powerful one. 12 vultures. Who had the gods favored? The one who saw the sign first, or the one who saw the greater number? The ambiguity sparked a fierce argument. The seed of rivalry had blossomed into a bitter conflict. The bond that had seemed unbreakable began to fracture under the weight of ambition and pride. Romulus, asserting his divine right, began to plow a furrow around the Palatine Hill, marking the sacred boundary, the asterisk, P-O-M-A-E-O-I-U-M, asterisk, of his new city. He declared that no one should cross this line with hostile intent. It was a line drawn in the dirt, but it represented something much deeper, a division between 2 brothers who had once shared everything. In a moment of defiant mockery, or perhaps tragic misunderstanding, Remus leaped over the newly dug trench and the low wall. What happened next has been debated by historians for centuries. Was it a fit of rage, a calculated act of power, or a terrible, tragic accident? Whatever the motive, Romulus struck his brother down. Remus, the boy who had survived the river and the wild, fell at the hands of his own twin. The foundation of Rome was thus consecrated with the brother's blood, a city born from both love and loss, from a shared dream that ended in a solitary nightmare. Romulus, now alone, became the first king of Rome. He carried the weight of his actions, the ghost of his brother, a permanent shadow on his reign. He named the city Rome after himself, a constant, echoing reminder of his victory and his sorrow. From this brutal, tragic beginning, something extraordinary grew. The city of Rome, founded on a hill of strife, became a beacon of civilization. It absorbed people from all walks of life, growing from a small settlement into a bustling republic, and eventually a sprawling empire that would stretch across 3 continents. Its laws, its architecture, its language, and its engineering would shape the course of Western civilization. The Roman legions, the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the philosophies of Seneca and Cicero, all of it grew from that single furrow plowed by Romulus. The story of the twins became the founding myth of this mighty empire. It was a story told to every Roman child, a symbol of the city's own character. Fierce, ambitious, born of struggle, and destined for greatness. Romulus and Remus became more than just men. They became an enduring symbol. They represent the dual nature of Rome itself, the creative and the destructive, the civilizing and the conquering, the love and the violence that are so often intertwined in human ambition. Their legacy is a timeless reminder that from the deepest tragedies, the greatest triumphs can arise, and that even the most powerful empires have their roots in the simple and often painful stories of family. Their tale is a poignant reflection on the very nature of foundation and legacy. Every great beginning seems to demand a great sacrifice. The bond between the brothers, so powerful and pure in their youth, was ultimately severed by the very ambition that drove them to greatness. It's a story that asks us to consider the price of power, the fragility of love in the face of ambition, and the complex, often contradictory, forces that shape our destinies. The she-wolf, the augury, the fratricide, these elements are not just mythic decorations. They are profound symbols of the wildness, the divinity, and the human conflict at the heart of all great enterprises. The city they envisioned would go on to rule the world, a testament to their shared dream, even if only one of them lived to see it begin. And so, from the cradle of myth, from the tragic sacrifice on a lonely hill, rose the city eternal. Rome, thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing for more tales from history and myth. We'd love to have you in our community. Until next time, stay curious.